Lots of media organisations from Channel 4 to the BBC and The Guardian are facing tough questions over the apparently open secret of Russell Brand's behaviour, but the spotlight's also been turned on journalists who reported the claims against him. Brand's defenders asked why now? Why didn't they go to police? And legal experts have warned he'll have no prospect of a fair trial given all this open speculation. Joining me now to discuss this is the broadcaster and former editor of the Sunday Times, Andrew Neil. Andrew, great to have you on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Thank you for coming on. Can't think of anyone better placed than you, a former editor of the Sunday Times. So let me start with their investigation. When you read it, what was your verdict professionally as a piece of investigative journalism?
When I read it and finished it, I was very proud of the Sunday Times. It was exactly in the tradition of that newspaper's history of investigative journalism. When I took over as editor, that tradition had died a little bit. I did my best when I was there to put investigative journalism back into the centre of it. We got a lot of great investigative stories. The famous Insight team, probably the most famous investigative unit in the world, had new life in it, and that has continued. People often say, "Oh, investigative journalism is dead." Well, this shows that it isn't. It was meticulous. It was unhurried. It took over 4 years. Investigative journalism is expensive and not quick. You got to get things right. You got to get it lawyered. Sometimes the life of it's lawyered out of it. And of course, they gave Mr. Brand 8 days to respond. And you and I know, as ex-editors, Piers, that given the ability in Britain to get gagging injunctions to stop publication of stories, that was quite a dangerous thing to do. So I think they did everything the right way. They presented it correctly. They got the research done correctly. They laid it out. And let's see where it goes from here.
Yeah, and I think that's the crucial bit for me, is that lots of people jumping on various bandwagons here, many racing to say, well, he's obviously guilty, that's it. He must be cancelled forever from everything, which is already happening corporately. Others going the other way, saying, no, it's all a conspiracy by mainstream media, which, of course, is, I think, a lot of nonsense. I'm sure you share that view. I've seen your tweets about that. So what we're left with is where this will go legally. And there is a concern by the legal world that this may already actually no longer be able to go to a courtroom because of all the prejudicial material that's been out there. What do you say to that?
It's the usual self-pleading of lawyers who don't like journalists, but they don't like us as much as we don't like lawyers. If you follow this line, then we do nothing. We do no serious journalism at all. Oh, we can't publish this. It might affect a fair trial somewhere at some unspecified period down the pike. And I would just point out, if it wasn't for the Sunday Times Channel 4 investigation, you and I wouldn't be talking about the possibility of criminal proceedings in the first place. There's been plenty of time to get to that. It's only because of this investigative journalism that there's even now the possibility. We don't know whether it will happen or at least the possibility of criminal proceedings taking place. That wouldn't have happened without this investigation. So I really think that is a way of trying to stop journalists doing their proper job. We need more of this, not less.
Yeah, and actually, I was reminding people yesterday, the Harvey Weinstein scandal was broken by journalists, women going to journalists who then published the revelations. That led to a police investigation, and now he's languishing in prison probably the rest of his life. But that started the same way.
And I think for the women involved, this is very important too. We know how difficult it is for women to come forward in these circumstances. We know the pressures not to do it are huge. And it could be in this case, as in the Weinstein case, that women speaking to journalists, to newspapers first, is an interim stage before it then results in wider proceedings and facilitates their ability to do so. And I think that's another plus too.
But there is, there's a bedrock of a democratic society, which is innocent till proven guilty. And that's not proven guilty by a newspaper or by social media. Ultimately, it has to be proven in a court of law. And I have a view about this, that whatever you think of Russell Brand, and you can make your own mind up about his morals from everything he said himself. Mariella read out some pretty disturbing stuff earlier from his own book, his own words. I read some from an interview I did with him for GQ, which now looks pretty unsavoury. But he remains at the moment somebody who should be considered innocent till proven guilty by the law, shouldn't he?
Yes, and that's our way of doing things. But the newspaper is not, or Channel 4, they're not trying and convicting him. That's not their job. Their job is to put information. Don't forget, the best definition of journalism is to put into the public domain facts that powerful people don't want to see in the public domain. And this is a classic example of that. This isn't trial by media. The newspaper and the television station have done their job. It is now, if this is going to be a trial, that's a job for the police.
Yeah.
That's a job for the prosecution service. That's a job for the courts, not the job for the newspapers to do that. Their job is to expose and reveal. That's what they've done. Whether we go forward into criminal matters is another matter entirely, and not for the media to decide. But I think the one thing that we do already know is whether criminality is involved or not, which, as I say, is not for mere journalists to decide. It's pretty clear there was some egregious behaviour going on here, some behaviour that anybody should be ashamed of, and that major media companies were complicit. And I think we're seeing a lot of hypocrisy now, because I see all these people now rushing to disassociate themselves from Russell Brand. Well, I would ask a fundamental question. Why were they ever associated with him in the first place? For me, some of the most revealing footage in the documentary was not the investigative journalism, strong as it was. It was his performances as a so-called stand-up comedian, in which he was neither funny, but consistently vulgar, rude, and unwatchable. Why did the BBC? Why did Channel 4? Why did The Guardian? Why did the New Statesman? Why did the Labour Party ever wanted to be associated with essentially this sleaze bag in the first place?
I mean, I think to play devil's advocate, the answer, I would imagine, is that although you found him grotesque and unfunny, clearly a lot of people found him hilarious. They just did. He sold buckets of books. He put loads of ratings onto television programs. He wrote columns that were widely disseminated and enjoyed. So he's one of those very polarizing figures. And he does have, he's got 6.5 million people subscribed to his YouTube channel. There's a huge following there.
And I'm sure that if you and I put public hangings on our program, it'd be pretty good for ratings for a while as well. There are some things as standards, and particularly in Britain, where there's this strong tradition of public service broadcasting, and not just doing it for the money, not just doing it because it's commercial, because it gets big ratings. It was two public service broadcasters, the BBC and Channel 4, which facilitated this guy to do it, and they shouldn't have done. And we have an ability in our culture, I think it's true in America, parts of Europe, but above all in Britain, where we elevate people of no talent, people of no redeeming value whatsoever, to the status of national icons. I give you Jimmy Savile. It's a classic example of that. A man of no talent who had a hotline to Margaret Thatcher and the royal family. And in a different way, I'm not comparing the two in terms of what they did, in a different way, we elevated Russell Brand to be this man that seemed to have the pulse of young people in British society, whose every word we should hang on, and was worthy of interviews on the BBC's Newsnight or in Guardian conferences or editing the New Statesman. It's just nonsense. And this power of celebrity, which seems to have the ability to make sensible people stupid, this is another classic example of it, and it is corrosive of our culture and what is good in it.
Andrew Neil, I think in cricket parlance, you've just come off the long run, and I appreciate you joining the programme.
You can see behind me, there's a good cricket match going on here. That's the year England won the Ashes.
Fantastic. Well, then it's an appropriate analogy. Andrew, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.